you're Karun. You're living in London. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So
Been here for
tell us,
about 34 years now.
almost a local.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us about your story. I hear it's quite amazing how you got involved with the Path of Bliss.
Yeah. But it started, really in my previous life. I won't go into all the reasons for that, but it was with Krsna. So that's, and it was sort of rehabilitation from what I must have been some terrible things that I'd done in a previous life as a yogi. And about the time, it was either when Krishna left or I died, I realized that one of the things that he had always said is to find that Krishna or Taraka Brahma within yourself. And I think this is something that he said to a lot of people at that time. And as I presumably died, or it may have been when he went off to the Mahabharat, which he was 60 when he did, that I realized I hadn't done that. So really, there was no reason to come back in another life until Taraka Brahma was here again, and that was Baba. When I was born, it was my early life was extremely blissful. I think my first great spiritual experiences when I was probably about 1 year old. I know I was only just standing up. I couldn't really walk around. We were standing on the road outside the house, and the trees were sort of whooshing in the wind. And suddenly, the whole universe opened up, and I could see the interconnection of everything in this entire universe, and it was extremely blissful. And this sort of thing happened a lot during my early years, but sort of in diminishingly amounts as the world sort of intruded in on me. Now, when I was about 2 or 3, my parents were greatly amused because I'd be outside talking for hours on end to my imaginary friends. And they were called Father Bear and Panda Bear. And Father Bear was Krishna, who, by the way, was an extremely ordinary looking person like Baba, but amazing personality, that sort of great projection. So I think the conversations were mainly one way. But so it was me communicating with Taraka Brahma in the form that I knew, which was Krishna. But I don't know why I called him Father Bear, and then his friend was Panda Bear, and it was Anandamurti. So it was kind of like it was just me talking to Taraka Brahma, but in the old form of my previous initiation and the new initiation that would come to be. Now so my life sort of, skipping forward some years, it became, increasingly sort of troubled and upset because, the bliss was sort of reducing. But this is all part of the process of getting into our life. But, I wasn't born into what you'd call a spiritual family or onto the spiritual path. And that was part of my presumed rehabilitation from whatever terrible things I'd done. Now, so going forward, I sort of left school and had a career in advertising for about 5 years, and in the army for a couple of years, and travelled the world for about another year and a half. And by that stage, I was really looking for some meaning to my life, and I ended up in London for a year, took a lot of drugs and did all that sort of thing, and had a couple of spiritual experiences with that. Like the whole world, the universe opened up, and there was the whole Brahma, And I was with another friend doing the same thing in the grotty old streets of London in 1973. And we thought, well, there's nothing more we can do but go off to Tibet and join some Buddhist monastery. As if that was ever going to happen, with this sort of decadent lifestyle. And eventually, the end of 74, I went back to Melbourne where I'd started. And my cousin, Bhaktavirya, this is just before Christmas 74, and he'd just been initiated, and he came to Melbourne to visit us. And he said, I've just had, this yoga group I've just joined. And he explained a bit about it. It sounded a bit weird to me because I think he got it bit wrong. You know? I don't think it's too familiar with what it was all about in those days. But I thought, oh, okay. But I mean, I'd seen all of these yogis and so on. I thought they were all frauds and charlatans, you know, all the different groups that were around at the time. And I just not impressed at all. So he said, look, there's an acharya here, you know, teacher in Melbourne at the moment. So he can come and give a talk at the house you're living in. Now, at that stage, I was living in a house with all these radicals. It was like gay activists and occultists and drug dealers. And it was just and the house looked like something out of the Addams Family, you know, this sort of Gothic mansion which we were all living in. And it was just like a party house. So one of the guys, Auntie Joan, who was called, he was this gay activist, and he did the room up beautifully for this acharya to come and visit us. So this was Taraka Sharp. You probably remember Taraka Sharp. From Italian Dada. He'd just got out of prison in Calcutta. He was walking down the street, and Bubba was walking along with his group of people, and Bubba was looking at him the whole time. But people were between them, but Bubba's gaze on him never faltered. You know, it was never broken. So he went along and sort of immediately went to whole time training. Now, he was a great radical, and he'd been a member of some gang in Italy before he was in prison in India, presumably drug smuggling or something like that. I presume is why he was there. So anyway, he came along and gave us a talk, and he said he had an LFT with him, and he said to the LFT as they were going in, he's like, we might have to fight for our lives to get out of this place alive. So he was sort of, but so he sat down and he started talking. He was a wonderful revolutionary, you know, and this was the sort of talk that he gave, and we were all most impressed by this. And there was one woman in our group who was some sort of occultist, and she said when he was sitting there talking, she could see a small, round, sort of short man floating above this acharya's head, sort of controlling the talk, you know. So we just say again.
I wonder who that could be.
Yeah. So we were most impressed, particularly because of all this revolution talk, you know. And so I'm not sure if it was the next morning, but it was New Year's Day. So that's the 1st of January, 1975. I went along to the Jagrati and to get initiated, because, you know, as soon as he started talking, I knew this is my life. You know, there wasn't a shadow of a doubt. This is what I will do for the rest of my life. And so I went along, and he said, I can't initiate you today. It's a holiday. The yogis have holidays. But I said, come back tomorrow. And, so I went back tomorrow, and he initiated me. And just driving away from that after the initiation, I realised that my whole life had changed. It was like I had taken control of my own destiny, you know. And I knew nothing about it. I hadn't, you know, Jama and Niyama or any of this sort of stuff. And, you know, obviously Dada explained about, I have a guru now. And he said, well, you can come on Sunday and we'll have this Jama Chakra, you know, this sort of group meditation thing. I thought, oh, okay, that sounds interesting, I think. And the Jagrati had the walls in the Dharma Chakra room were painted in this sort of brilliant, bright, burnt orange colour, you know, so it was pretty sort of trippy looking. And it was Auntie Joan and I went along, and he was sort of dressed up like some sort of gay samurai, and I think I was wearing a T-shirt and sarong and so on. And we went in, and everyone was dressed in white. I don't know why. Jayanta was there, and about 2 or 3 other people when we arrived. They're all blonde-haired and white clothes. And I said to Joan, I think we've died and gone to heaven. Look, they're angels. You know? They look so perfectly. They look so clean, you know, and shiny. And, well, Jayanta always looked that way. But anyway, so that was kind of that. And I stayed on in Melbourne, and I still stayed in that house for some time. And Bhaktiviri had just gone off to LFT training, and when he came back and saw I was still in that house with all these disreputable people, he thought, he thought I was damned and doomed. So then he went off to Perth and didn't see him for some years. But I had a number of experiences in that house, doing sadhana there. And, most of the people started off doing sadhana, but, everyone was very inspired by this acharya. And eventually it all sort of, got a bit out of hand. And I won't explain too many of the experiences of Baba getting really angry with me for doing things, but he'd sort of come to me in my sadhana and yeah. Anyway, it was eventually I went up. Yeah. Well, there was one time. Okay, well, I'll tell you this one story. It was I pretty much stopped taking drugs by that stage. Well, as soon as I was initiated. Although there was one time someone came along. I had taken a lot of LSD in London. And they said, "Oh, I've got this really good LSD." So, "Oh, no, I don't do that anymore." But so it's really good stuff. And well, all right, just just this once, big mistake. And so we were sort of sitting there, and this fellow, this guy, Auntie Joan, who was a very psychic person as well. He and I were sitting there together. I just couldn't get control of my head, and I thought, I'm going to go mad. I can't hold on to this any longer. So I said to Auntie Joan, "Look, our lives haven't been very good. Let's just leave our bodies, And so we sat down and started doing sadhana, and we both came out of our bodies, and we were sort of floating in the room there. And I'm sort of thinking, now what? And then Baba appeared to me. He said, "You can't get liberation yet. You've still got a lot of work to do." Oh, he said, "You'll have to reincarnate." And he sort of looked over to where I was sitting on the floor, and I looked back, and there I was on the floor. I looked sort of dead, except for a dark red glow in my Anahat chakra. He said, "Well, you have to reincarnate. That body there looks perfectly fine. Why don't you use that one?" Great sense of humour Baba had, And so as soon as he said that, boom, I was back in the womb and went through the whole experience of being born again, which was, I remember being born the first time, and it was pretty traumatic. And that was also, but I kind of felt like I'd been reborn into a whole new life. But yeah, and then there was another time my previous, like 2 or 3 lives ago, I must have been, I believe I was a fairly advanced yogi who went right off and started using occult powers for negative purposes. So this was a big sort of problem. And I started having all this occult awareness again, probably because of all those, taking all those drugs before, you probably remember all the people used to have all these symptoms, from the occult symptoms like bouncing up and down, doing sadhana, all this sort of stuff. So I sort of became aware that I could, I could see things and so on. And I thought, well, I won't go into the details of what I wanted to do, but it was something quite benevolent. I wanted to put an idea in somebody's head. And so I sat down and started doing sadhana and visualised this person's numerological grid to get into their head. As soon as I did this, Baba came into my head, and he was very angry, and he said, he sort of slapped me sideways, and I sort of fell sideways on the floor. And, I've forgotten what he said. It was something pretty terrible anyway. That's, about what I'd done. So I was, generally speaking, I was pretty scared of Baba for good reason. And so anyway, it was early 76. I went up to Sydney. This is when we had the office was in Queen Street, Newtown. I remember you were there. And it was a great time, and I spent that whole year just doing sadhana and reading Baba's books. And by the end of that year, I was, I wanted to be an LFT, but I knew that I didn't really want to go to the training. I'd done, I'd sort of done enough training, like army training and so on. And so Abhidevananda was our, was in SS at the time. And he said, okay. So he sent me down to Canberra. This is soon after you'd been there. It was you were there, and then Ranjanananda was LFT there, and then I took over from him. And I think you were still. I think at this stage were you fasting then in the caravan near the
outside the High Commission?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, all those demonstrations we used to do, you know, those demonstrations and everything else. I thought that was great fun. You know, I mean, you were just sitting there starving in a caravan, but we were sort of doing all of these, you know, sort of making a lot of noise. It used to wind up the Indian High Commission people. Why didn't they just ignore us? You know, they insisted on getting the federal police to come and control us and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, that's another whole story that went on for some time. But anyway, that was a lot of fun.
Actually, just on that, the High Commissioner at one of the demonstrations, I was watching it from my tent where I was doing the fast, and he lost his temper. The police actually had to refrain him because he's trying to attack Margies, and here's the one who's been
by that stage, you know, all my friends and so on were going off to whole timer training, and I had to decide whether I wanted to do that or not. And I thought, no, I've been in organisations before, like 5 years in a really slick advertising agency and a couple of years in the army, and I've said, no, I've had enough organisations. So, you know, anyway, moving on. First time, I'd got married and had children by 78, and I didn't have, I couldn't really just go off to see Bubba when he was in prison. And when he came out, as you know, he didn't come to Australia. They didn't give him a visa, typical Australian government. And so it wasn't until 84 that I got a chance to go to India to see Bubba. Now, as you remember, they had the blacklist there, and we knew that all the names, all the Margies were on the blacklist. And I should have changed my name. But then for some reason, we used to get these, ideas would come around, and it was sort of, everyone said, oh, no, they're not using the blacklist anymore, so you can go to India. So I did, and I got to Bombay Airport, and I was, refused entry, which was very traumatic. And I'm sitting there in the airport waiting to be deported back to Singapore, and there was a guy there in the distance, and he looked like Bubba. It was a real person. It wasn't Bubba, but it was kind of amazing. Sort of, it just reminded me how close I was, but wasn't going to happen, So it was 2 years later, I finally, I changed my name and got a new passport. So it was 86, and Bubba's in Lake Gardens at the time. And I went with, going along to see him and maybe get PC, hopefully. And there were just three of us there. And this is the day after I'd got there, and they said, oh, you might have to wait for ages. And so the dear Dudder who was organising it give us a test. So he said, do you all know 16 points? Yes, of course we know 16 points. We've been doing them for like a decade or more. What are they? And the three of us together couldn't figure out what the 16 points were, because you read a lot of Bubba books at first, and then we sort of got a bit distracted from that, and we had trouble even putting together Jama and Niyama, the 10 points of Jama and Niyama. Anyway, so it's after that I'm kind of straight in front of Bubba, no waiting, no queues or anything, and down on the floor and did stung pranam and. Sort of sat up, and he said, oh, just come on, come closer, He says, what's your name? And usual thing, Karun, Karun, what? Yeah, I was so nervous I could hardly speak, So he sort of asked me, oh, Karun, oh, yeah. You know what he sounded like. I don't have to do the voice. And he said, oh, move back a bit so I can see you properly. And he's kind of looking up and down my chakra, my chakras. And he says, such a good little boy. But why have you done these terrible things? And I'd sort of heard that he might say, you bad boy, or done this or that. And people will say, don't confess to anything, because he might be looking at something else. So don't give him something else to be angry at you about, like children, And so I didn't answer, but yeah, and he said, come closer, and he put my head down, and he was sitting up on his bed thing, and he put my head down on just in front of him, and he's rubbing my head, and he's saying in a rhythmical way, saying, "Baba loves this little boy," and it was just absolutely mind-boggling, and just sort of blew my mind, as they say. And he patted me on the back a couple of times. It was like tap tap, like behind my anahat chakra, sort of adjusting something. And he got his stick and sort of just tapped me on the side, and that was pretty much it. But I was, coming out. As everyone says, you come out of that and you feel that your life has completely changed. And I was very aware that he had rearranged my samskaras, and he'd presumably taken some away, but I was more aware of the fact he'd rearranged them so that I could deal with them in a more sort of systematic way. And over the years since that time, there've been a few times when I've realised that something that's happened was because of something he did during that PC. And but then that was 86. I went back. I went to DMC. I think it was 87, and then again 88, out at Tildula. It's all a bit of a blur, really. But that's the sort of experience you heard enough about. But it was wonderful. So then I was always still. All my life, I've been very aware of this finding Taraka Brahma within yourself, But so that's why I was never in a great hurry to go and see Baba personally. And then it was, after doing this a few times, it was by 89, I'd moved back to London. In 1990, I was doing some project, AM project that I'd been recruited to do, sort of coordinating some project. So I was travelling around the world a lot, and so I got to see Baba a few times, and then it was July 1990, and for the first time I was about to leave Calcutta, and I thought, I'll give Baba a garland. I'd never done it before. To me, it was always a little bit sort of over-the-top sentimentality or something like that. But I really wanted to do it that time. And I also decided I've got to come and see him at least twice a year now. I just can't live without seeing Baba at least twice a year. So I went down and got the garland and everything else and came up. This is out at Tildula, and I was going to be leaving in the morning. So that evening, he would, twice a day he'd come out for a walk up on the roof because he wasn't very well. And this time it was the evening, and it was very late. It must have been almost midnight, I think. And he had been very late, and he went up. So I think I was the only person waiting when he came down. And I gave the garland to Keshavananda. You wouldn't put it on Baba yourself at that time. So Keshavananda took that, and Baba turned around and looked straight at me and did namaskar. And it was such a shock that the power of that was so shocking. I gasped, and I don't know if I actually jumped backwards, or it sort of almost blew me backwards. And I thought, what an idiot. I must have looked so, And he finished his namaskar and sort of turned and walked in. And I was thinking to myself, he must be thinking, this guy's a real idiot, But so he went in, and that was the last time I saw him, And
this was 1990, was it? In July?
Yes, July 1990. Yeah. So that was only, few, 4 months, I think, before he died, before he left. And when he did leave his body, I was actually working in Colorado at the time. So I didn't have the money available. It was just I couldn't get to Calcutta, for the funeral, which is unfortunate. But I wasn't that upset because, I got in the car and drove up onto a hill in the Rocky Mountains overlooking the plains across Colorado, And I was thinking, if Baba's leaving us now, it means that he thinks we're ready to take control of the mission ourselves, And I felt quite, sort of quite good about that, really. Much as I was missing the fact that I wouldn't be able to see him anymore, just after I got over my years of fear and everything else, and suddenly there he'd gone. So, yeah, but no, I'm still, since then I've always been very confident that, we're on track for establishing Sadvipra Samaj. And I've put a lot of thought into it. I mean, before I used to be mainly sort of active in Prout, the Global Prout Policy Council and all those type of and under ideas, things we used to do. But now I'm more interested in the neo-humanism, because I think that's the key to Prout, is neo-humanism. So really just in recent years, I've spent my time, particularly now that I'm retired, not that I ever did much anyway in the work sphere, but so I spent my time writing now. I wrote a book about explaining the Brahma Chakra cycle and all this, and a bit about Prout and everything else. But I couldn't get that published, and people said that people don't want to read that sort of thing. So at the moment, I'm writing a science fiction book about the future, set like 200 years in the future. Because as I see it, a lot of people are quite sort of downcast about the future of the mission. It doesn't seem to be happening. But Bubba, when Bubba used to say things like it's going to happen very soon, well, maybe it will, but to a person of that magnitude, very soon could be another 100 years or so. And as I see it, the condition we're in now with global warming, and anyway, I think that's probably about all I need to say about that. It will happen later in this century, but I think the Sadvipra Samaj will be next century.